Just after sunrise on August 1, 2025, the quiet streets near 40th Street and Meadow Drive in North Phoenix looked exactly as they always did, calm, warm, and harmless. But inside one home, something unspeakable had already happened. At 6:10 a.m., a single 911 call from a young lady pierced the morning. Neighbors would later say they didn't hear screams, just a sound they couldn't place. A dull crack. A thud. Then silence, the kind that feels wrong. Police arrived within minutes. Officers stepped into a scene that felt frozen in time, a home that looked ordinary on the outside but radiated chaos the moment the door swung open. Furniture shifted. Items toppled. And there, in the middle of it all, they found a woman fighting for her life. The police found her with multiple gunshot wounds. She was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. Alma Victoria Suchilt, 45 years old. A mother. A friend. A woman who was supposed to start her morning like everyone else. Paramedics worked frantically, voices sharp, movements quick, the air thick with urgency. They rushed her toward the ambulance. But even from the outside, neighbors watching from behind blinds knew the story wasn't heading toward a miracle. The officers scanned the scene. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in, nothing stolen, and a single, unmistakable conclusion rising like smoke. Someone inside that home knew her. Someone she trusted. Someone who was suddenly gone. And as investigators stepped back out into the rising Arizona heat, one chilling question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy. Where was the one person who should have been there? And before this story goes any further, understand this. Cases like this disappear when people stop paying attention. If you're listening right now and you're not subscribed, you're choosing to let stories like Alma's fade into silence. Subscribe, because ignoring this is how tragedies repeat. Before that tragic morning, Alma Victoria Suchilt was more than a name. She was a daughter, a mother, a partner, and someone whose presence shaped the early hours of many Phoenix mornings. At 45 years old, she wasn't defined by age but by the warmth she brought into the lives around her. The way neighbors would nod in greeting, the little laughter drifting from her living room in the quiet hours, and the genuine care she showed the people she loved. Alma was a wife, and she was a mother to a daughter they shared. Theirs was not a fairy tale, and no marriage is without bumps, but for years friends and family described Alma as committed to her family, someone who tried to find balance between love, responsibility, and the everyday rhythms of life. Through birthdays, school events, late work nights, and ordinary routines, she created a home rooted in connection. At her job, Alma was known for her reliability and steady presence, a citizen who worked hard, contributed, and rarely asked for anything. She was rooted in her community not by fame or accolades, but by consistency. Dropping off school lunches in the morning, collecting the mail, running errands for elderly neighbors, and greeting passers-by with a sincere "have a good day." To the outside world, she was quiet. To those close to her, she was generous, familiar, and irreplaceable. This is where most people stop watching. And that's exactly why these stories keep happening. If you're not subscribed, ask yourself why, and if you have a reason, put it in the comments. Say it out loud. Silence protects no one. But beneath this ordinary and peaceful life, a darker truth had been unfolding, one that left family members whispering about signs they now wish they had read differently. Despite her composed exterior, there were moments that hinted at something she rarely spoke aloud. Unsettling moments that, in hindsight, might have been clues. Before that morning's gunshots jolted the calm of North Phoenix, there were subtle tremors beneath the surface of Alma Victoria Suchilt's life, tremors no one fully saw until it was too late. Behind the polite waves to neighbors and the familiar rhythms of a working mom, there lurked a darker pattern, a pattern rooted in fear, denial, and the silent scars of an abusive home. Friends and family later told investigators that Alma and her husband had argued frequently in the weeks leading up to her death, often about things that seemed small to outsiders but were part of a dangerous cycle of control and intimidation. Their daughter reported to police that on the night before her mother's death, there had been one of those familiar arguments, this time centered on security cameras installed around their home. Neighbors had been uneasy for months. Some recalled hearing gunshots fired into the air weeks before the shooting. Multiple reports had been made to police, but they never yielded arrest. One neighbor, too afraid to stay, has since moved away. Court documents later confirmed that previous cases of domestic violence involving Alma and her husband had been reported. She was described by those who knew her as quiet and loving, but repeatedly caught in a cycle of mistreatment at home, a cycle that left visible marks, both physical and emotional. Yet Alma repeatedly denied that she was a victim, insisting to friends and even officers that everything was fine, that there was no real danger. Even as alarm bells rang internally, black eyes unseen by most, shouts muffled through walls, and a pattern of frightening behavior, Alma never stepped forward to press charges. Her husband would claim he was the one being victimized, twisting words and blame in a way many unsafe environment survivors know all too well. And so, the cracks remained hidden, until they split open in the most devastating way possible. Because when fear becomes normal, danger can go unnoticed, until it's too late. If this part made you uncomfortable, good. It should. And if you're still watching without subscribing, understand this. Awareness saves lives, but only when people choose to stay. Subscribe now, or explain in the comments why you won't. But the full extent of what Alma endured, and what her husband told police, was far stranger and more chilling than anyone could have predicted. According to her daughter, the night began quietly, almost deceptively so. She told investigators that her father left the house shortly around midnight. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Just the sound of a door opening and closing, footsteps fading into the night. Inside the home, everything returned to stillness. The kind of stillness families grow used to, familiar, unremarkable, unthreatening. About an hour later, she heard him return. She remembers the sound clearly. Movement near the entrance, a door opening, then closing again. Nothing seemed out of place. No raised voices. No signs of conflict. Believing everything was normal, she went back to sleep, unaware that the final moments of her mother's life were already unfolding downstairs. She was jolted awake by screaming. Not a distant sound, not confusion, but terror. A scream so sharp and desperate it cut through the house like glass shattering. Before her mind could fully grasp what she was hearing, the screams were followed by gunshots. Multiple shots. Loud. Sudden. Unmistakable. The silence that followed was worse. Her heart pounding, she ran from her room, down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The living room came into view, and with it, a scene that would be etched into her memory forever. Her mother, Alma Victoria Suchilt, was slumped on the couch, unmoving. The room felt frozen in time, as though everything inside it had stopped breathing. Standing over her was her father, Jonathan Llamas Cisneros. He wasn't trying to help. He wasn't calling for assistance. According to her daughter, he appeared detached, muttering to himself, speaking words that didn't make sense. There was no explanation, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Then, just as suddenly as the violence had erupted, he turned and walked out. She watched him leave the house. Moments later, she heard a car start. Tires on pavement. And then, he was gone. Her hands shaking, her voice breaking, she called 911. She told the dispatcher that her father had just shot her mother. She reported that he had fled the scene in his car. Her words came out fast, tangled with panic and disbelief, but the message was clear. A woman had been shot, and the suspect was already on the move. Police response was immediate. Patrol units flooded the area within minutes. Sirens pierced the night as officers secured the home and rushed to locate the fleeing vehicle. A description was broadcast. Roads were monitored. Then air support was deployed. A police helicopter lifted into the darkness, its searchlight sweeping across streets, rooftops, and open roads, tracing the path of a man trying to outrun what he had done. On the ground, officers coordinated checkpoints and followed reported sightings. From above, the helicopter tracked movement, narrowing the distance. The city, still half asleep, was now the stage for a manhunt. Lights flashing, radios crackling, tension tightening with every mile. Inside the house, a daughter waited, surrounded by strangers, her world irreversibly shattered. Outside, police closed in. But the most critical question still hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying in its weight. Where was he going, and what would happen when they finally caught up to him? Stories like this don't end when the sirens stop. They end when people stop caring. If you're here and still haven't subscribed, that choice matters more than you think. If you refuse, the least you can do is tell us why. Don't vanish quietly. By the time the first patrol cars reached the house, 47-year-old Jonathan Llamas Cisneros was already gone. To police records, and to neighbors who had heard arguments spill through the walls before, Jonathan was not a man associated with peace. Officers would later confirm that the night before the shooting, he and his wife, Alma Victoria Suchilt, had been arguing again. It wasn't an isolated dispute. It was part of a pattern, one that had quietly escalated behind closed doors. After the gunshots, Jonathan fled the scene in his silver Toyota 4Runner, disappearing into the darkness before officers could arrive. Within minutes, an alert was issued. His vehicle description was broadcast across multiple agencies. What followed was not a routine search. It was a coordinated, high-stakes pursuit. Traffic cameras and law enforcement tracking quickly placed the 4Runner traveling south on Interstate 8, heading toward Gila Bend. That direction raised immediate alarms. Interstate 8 is a known corridor, a direct route toward the southern border. Police attempted a traffic stop. Jonathan did not comply. Instead, he continued driving, refusing to pull over, forcing the situation to escalate. At that point, the pursuit expanded. Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, Arizona Department of Public Safety, Border Patrol, and Arizona Department of Transportation all became involved. Air and ground units worked together, calculating distances, traffic conditions, and risk to the public. Officers knew they had to stop him, and stop him fast. Near Gila Bend, authorities executed a pit maneuver, a precision immobilization technique used only when the threat is severe. The maneuver worked. Jonathan's SUV spun out, sliding across the roadway before coming to a forced stop. Weapons drawn, commands shouted, officers moved in. Jonathan was taken into custody without further gunfire. A search of the vehicle revealed critical evidence, items that would later be logged, photographed, and entered into the case file. Investigators also confirmed what they had feared from the start. Jonathan appeared to be attempting to flee toward Mexico, a final, desperate move to escape the consequences closing in on him. As he was restrained and placed into custody, the chase was over. But the investigation was only beginning. Because what police would uncover next, about his past, his history, and what had been happening inside that home long before the gunshots, would change how this case was understood entirely. And it would raise a chilling question. How much of this tragedy could have been stopped before it ever reached this night? When Jonathan Llamas Cisneros was finally taken into custody, the relief was immediate, but brief. Because what police documented next told a far darker story. At the time of his arrest, Jonathan was formally booked on multiple charges: second-degree murder, felony flight from law enforcement, and drug-related offenses tied to what officers discovered during and after the pursuit. The chase itself wasn't treated as a separate incident. It became part of the crime, a continuation of the violence that had begun inside the home hours earlier. Back at the house, investigators worked carefully through the crime scene. The living room, once a shared family space, had become the focal point of the investigation. Officers recovered a firearm believed to have been used in the shooting, along with at least 7 spent shell casings, scattered in a pattern that suggested multiple shots fired in rapid succession. Each casing was photographed, marked, and logged, their placement helping detectives reconstruct where the shooter had been standing, and where Alma had been when her life was taken. Meanwhile, evidence recovered during Jonathan's arrest deepened the case. Inside his possession, officers found a loaded 9mm Glock magazine, fully intact, separate from the weapon left behind at the house. The presence of the loaded magazine raised immediate questions. Why leave the firearm, but keep the ammunition? Was it panic? Or was it intentional? Then came another discovery. Police also recovered 2 small plastic bags containing illegal substances, consistent with controlled substances, leading to additional charges. These findings supported what investigators already suspected, that Jonathan was not simply fleeing in shock, but attempting to escape responsibility while carrying items that could further implicate him. Detectives would later note something else that stood out. Jonathan did not call for help. He did not report an accident. He did not attempt CPR. Instead, he left the scene, armed himself with ammunition, and drove, fast, toward a route that could have taken him out of the country. To investigators, this wasn't confusion. It looked like conscious evasion. A cover-up doesn't always involve lies spoken aloud. Sometimes it's written in actions, what someone takes, what they leave behind, and how far they're willing to run. And as prosecutors began reviewing the evidence, one question grew louder with every report, every photograph, every recovered item. What else had been happening long before this night, that no one outside that house truly saw? As detectives began piecing together Jonathan Llamas Cisneros' movements, a troubling possibility emerged almost immediately. They learned that Jonathan had close family ties in Mexico, a fact that reframed the high-speed flight south as more than panic. His direction of travel, the route he chose, and how long he refused to stop all suggested something calculated. Investigators quietly began working under the assumption that he may have been heading for the border, hoping to disappear before questions could catch up to him. But this case didn't begin the night Alma was killed. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a pattern, one that neighbors said had been impossible to ignore. Back in May 2025, months before the shooting, multiple neighbors had called police to report gunfire coming from the area. Shots fired into the air. Loud. Unsettling. Random. The calls never resulted in arrests, but they were logged, documented, filed away. Then detectives spoke to Jamie, a neighbor who had lived in the area for 11 years. What Jamie described painted a chilling picture. Jamie said there had always been something off about the house. Security cameras mounted in every direction, watching the street, the yard, even neighboring properties. Windows and doors covered in tinfoil, blocking visibility from the outside. A home that looked less like a residence, and more like a bunker. Then came the story that stuck with her. One day, a dog walker stopped near the property. The dog relieved itself on the edge of the yard. As the owner reached into a bag to clean it up, a man from the house suddenly appeared, holding a gun. According to Jamie, he pointed it and said, "Don't let your dog do that in my yard." That incident alone was enough to make neighbors uneasy. But it was never followed up, until now. Then came Jonathan's interview. Sitting across from detectives, Jonathan didn't deny the argument. He didn't deny the shooting. Instead, he told a story that immediately raised alarms. He claimed Alma had been having an affair with a member of the Sinaloa cartel, a man he said lived just a few houses away. According to Jonathan, this mysterious neighbor had been watching him, stalking him, and even infiltrating his home. Jonathan said he had installed cameras to protect himself. But detectives noticed something strange. The alleged neighbor never appeared on any of the footage. Jonathan had an explanation ready. He claimed the cartel member possessed a device capable of disabling or manipulating security cameras, allowing him to move unseen. He insisted this was why the man never appeared, not because he wasn't there, but because he was too sophisticated to be caught on video. The story grew more disturbing. Jonathan told detectives that on the night of the killing, he became convinced the man was inside the house, hiding in the box spring of the bed. He said the argument with Alma escalated because she denied it, denied the affair, denied the threat, denied everything. Then Jonathan made his most shocking claim. He told detectives the cartel member suddenly appeared inside the dining room and began shooting at him, and that he had returned fire. But the evidence didn't support it. There were no witness reports of anyone else in the house, no forced entry, no third set of footprints, no unknown DNA. Only Jonathan, Alma, and their daughter were present at the time of the shooting. Detectives began to see the pattern clearly. Paranoia, fixation, delusions disconnected from reality. Jonathan eventually admitted something else. He acknowledged that he had been drinking heavily and using illegal substances the night before the shooting. A volatile mix layered on top of long-standing tension, fear, and obsession. To investigators, the pieces began aligning, not toward an external threat, but toward a narrative built to deflect blame, shaped by fear, substance use, and a crumbling grip on reality. And yet, one final question still hung in the air. If Jonathan truly believed someone else was inside that house, what did his daughter witness, and what did she hear, that night, which would either confirm or destroy his story completely? Jonathan Llamas Cisneros was booked on charges including second-degree murder and felony flight after the shooting of his wife, Alma Victoria Suchilt, and subsequent pursuit. Law enforcement has classified the case as a domestic violence incident given that he and the victim share a child together. It is a tragic reminder that sometimes the people we cherish the most can turn out to be completely different from what we believe. If there is one truth this story leaves behind, it is this. Silence can be dangerous. Before we close this story, if you're still watching and haven't subscribed, ask yourself what made you hesitate. Fear? Discomfort? Denial? Write it in the comments. And if you believe stories like Alma's deserve to be remembered, subscribe now, without thinking twice. But help can be life-saving. To any woman living in fear, walking on eggshells, making excuses for bruises that shouldn't exist or behaviors that feel wrong but are dismissed as temporary, you are not weak, and you are not alone. Abuse does not begin with violence. It begins with control, isolation, and fear. And it never gets better by staying quiet. Your life has value far beyond anyone who tries to diminish it. There are people, resources, and safe paths forward, even when it feels impossible to see them. Speaking up is not betrayal. Leaving is not failure. Surviving is not selfish. Let this story stand as a reminder. Love should never hurt, fear should never be normal, and silence should never be the price of peace. If you are in danger, reach out. Tell someone. Ask for help. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And you deserve to live, not just endure. As the community awaits the trial, they seek justice for Alma, even without the closure of bringing her home. Please don't forget Alma.